guys, welcome back. It is finally time to reassemble. Got the base plate painted. We are all nice and dry. It's been a couple of days now, so this enamel paint's properly hardened up. I've cleaned up the bottom of the cylinder as best I can, cleaned up the burner slider. Yeah, we're ready to reassemble. So not a lot of tools required for this really. I shall be using a number of suitably sized screwdrivers, one of which had to be ground down to make it thin enough. I'll be using a pair of needle nose pliers, possibly a pair of straight needle nose pliers. Keep options open on the bent ones. I shall be using a bodywork hammer later on, potentially some very fine tweezers, and a 6mm socket. I've just found this little screwdriver handle for a 1/4 inch drive 6mm socket. All good. So I've also got a nice fresh cup of tea, so let's just chip away at this. First job, I guess we should reassemble the engine assembly, I think they call them. So I'm just going to clear a few things here. We'll just move the boiler house out of the way, move the chimney out of the way, move the slider out of the way. Oh, by the way, the one piece I haven't shown you so far is the base, which is looking rather lovely in its new paint, all shiny. So let's move these other little bits out of the way. And the steam pipes all nicely polished. Right, good to go. Okay, so parts for the reassembly of the assembly, in fact. We have two small machine screws with little nuts on the back that hold this onto this onto this. We have the 4 longer machine screws that hold this plate onto the base plate, and we have the 4 medium-sized ones that hold the hub carriers, so the axle carriers, I suppose you'd call them bearing carriers, that attach on here. And this really is just a case of screwing these back together. I don't need to go particularly crazy with the tension. Now, these bits are always going to be buried, so we want to make sure that they are secure, but we don't need to worry about thread lock or anything crazy like that. Just put them on to a sensible tension and go from there. So with these ones, through the top of the easier said than done, through the top of the piston carrier there. And I'm almost certainly using the wrong terms to describe all of these, but it doesn't really make a great deal of difference, I guess. And then into here. Just loosely fit that for now. I'll nip them up afterwards. So that's the condensation tray under the piston carrier going onto the assembly base plate. I have a fairly good stab at those terms anyway. Nice to have a proper place to work for this kind of stuff, just in case you do accidentally drop something. So now I can nip those up, just holding them on the top, not using a screwdriver or anything. They don't need to be crazy tight. And that is the first part reassembled. Very happy with that. Okay, next. Hello, next door neighbour's dog. So the next bit then is to reattach the flywheel. I'm just going to drop these 4 bolts in place, because what I really don't want is for this to be sliding around any when I relocate it, because this light grey could scratch quite easily. I need to be super careful with this. So I'm going to actually use gravity and these 4 machine screws to locate. Holding both of them at the same time because the position along the axle needs to move a little. Okay, perfect. So now I'm just going to very carefully attach these tiny little nuts on the back. Hope you can see that okay. Onto these 4 threaded ends here. Again, I'm not going to tighten them past finger tight until such time as everything is in place. They are quite tight holes on these, but there's a little bit of adjustment possible on the top, and you need to make absolutely certain that you're not setting them out of alignment and locking the axle in one or the other. So that's really going to affect the friction in the whole assembly and stop the motor turning unless you're on quite a high steam pressure, which would be rather disappointing. This one's not going on. Let's try it on the other one. Try that upside down. These little nuts, and this is quite a useful case point, are not perfectly true. They are pretty iffy sometimes. Oh, that's threading on now. So some of them won't actually fit the 6mm socket because they're not hexagonal, they're squished. That's okay, not going to worry about that. Okay, we are located, so let's see how that's turning. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's fine. So let's just nip these up. Just holding them on the top with my finger, not using a screwdriver at this point. I will just double check this again before applying final torque to them. Because once this is tightened down, you can't get at these again. That'll do. It doesn't have any oil in at the moment, so I think that is absolutely fine. So I'm going to position this very carefully now on its side using the flywheel to hold the assembly. I've got a screwdriver in the back. I'm just nipping them up. There is nothing particularly special about this. You just have to have the right size screwdriver for the screw, not too wide, not too narrow. It has to be a perfect fit in the slot, and that may mean taking a screwdriver as I have here and actually grinding the end down. It's worth it. Nothing at this point would be worse than slipping and putting a great big gouge in that paint and having to start all over again. So we'll not be doing that. One more spin. Perfect. That will do nicely. On to the next bit. Okay, so next we have our spring and clip, and these little bad boys have a habit of pinging across the room, and they're not that easy to come by. I was looking for a while like I was going to have to use something improvised from a ballpoint pen or similar, but forgive the sacrilege, I did manage to find a supplier in the UK who still had the original parts. In fact, I've had a few bits and bobs from them. They're an eBay seller, but I'll drop a link down below. Got a few absolutely gorgeous little engines that I will be working on in the coming weeks, including a rather delightful Mamod stationary engine, and a little Signal Major, which I shall be working on in subsequent videos. So if this is your kind of thing, please don't hesitate to click that subscribe button. I promise I won't bore you with too much car content, although you'll have to just ignore those playlists. But I will set up a separate playlist for the rainy day projects, and this is very, very much what this is. Something to keep you occupied when it's too disgusting outside to bother going out. Just in case, by the way, you were wondering how these things work, they are not complicated, but they're just really elegant engineering. There's two holes in the plate here. One of them squirts the steam in, and the other one's just an open hole. And what happens is that the steam gets squirted into the bottom, the piston gets pushed out, the flywheel keeps it moving, and as it moves down on the flywheel, the position of the piston changes, and as it's pushed back, this hole here is exposed to the hole in the back of the piston, and the exhaust gas is allowed to go out. So all this is doing is getting pushed out, squeezed back, pushed out, squeezed back, and the flywheel keeps it moving. Now there are some models where there's a special mechanism that pushes both ways. I'll look at those another time, but I have a rather lovely little Wilesco marine engine kicking around that uses exactly that principle. So I'll do a video of that another time as well. If this is your thing, please feel free to subscribe, and I'll keep the content coming. So what I need to do here is attach that piston, and I will just make sure that it moves freely, and the spring will hold that in place. Lovely. I think we're good. I might need to adjust this plate in just a smidge, but I will do that in a moment. In the meantime, piston goes on. Spring goes on. Point it towards yourself, because if this thing's going to go flying anyway, you might as well be looking at yourself rather than down the back of a bench. And I'm going to have to hold this spring in a compressed position, which isn't always the easiest. So I think at this point I'm going to just hold it with my other hand and try and fit this little external circlip. There you go. So that fits into the groove around the end. It's basically just a normal external circlip. I'm not going to squash this too much, but I just want to make sure that's a good fit before releasing the spring. Okay, now the purpose of that is to stop the piston from flapping around, but to allow you to actually pull it over enough to be able to take the piston out and put some oil on it before running the engine. As I say, it's not complicated engineering, but it is very, very elegant. Lovely simple design and very, very effective. But I think that is us. So that's the steam assembly reconstructed. We have the 4 remaining machine screws and nuts to hold that onto the base plate, but before we do that, I'm going to reattach the burner slide and the boiler housing to the base plate. Oh no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I tell a lie. I do apologise. First thing I'm going to do is put the railing back on. I'd completely forgotten this. all polished up, of course, nice and shiny. Okay, just making sure that each one goes back on the original fitting. Again, these don't need to be crazy tight, but this is going to get knocked from time to time when you are removing the piston in order to lubricate it. Secure the tops of these, the rail holds them tight. There we go, so that really is piston assembly reconstructed. Right, on to the next piece. I'll just put this over here out of the way. Clear a space. And we can move on with this. I am very pleased with how it's turned out, considering what state it was in before. Scrapes and holes in the paint, massive great big brush strokes where it had been splattered on carelessly. This has gone back to metal and of course been primed and has had, I think in total, 3 to 4 coats of primer everywhere, in some places more, and it's had at least 3 to 4 coats of the top coat as well, so it's a really solid coating. Now you do have to be a little bit careful with this, because if you are careless you could end up chipping the paint as you're sliding these pieces in, but we shall just be very careful. Now this piece itself, the front of it should be straight, otherwise you might have difficulty trying to straighten out this leading edge here. Now in order to straighten that, you can put it on the edge of a vise, on a block, whatever it's going to be, but just make sure that that piece is nice and straight, and that's going to slide in first. Being really careful not to chip the paint, we're going to pop that in and rock the whole thing back. Of course, before we can do that, because the burner slide won't go through that hole, first thing we need to actually attach to the base plate is the burner slide. Now I went to the trouble of reconditioning this because I could, and because I had all the materials in hand to be able to do that. You don't have to. They're only about £8 or £9 to buy a replacement unit. Wilesco still sell them. In fact, you can just buy them from the website. But for the purposes of this one, I wanted everything to be original, and the reconditioning back to original condition was what I was after. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm using a rubber cutting mat, but what I'm going to do is turn it over, press the piece down onto the cutting mat, and I'm going to use the bodywork hammer to just tap those pieces gently back over. You'll notice I'm hitting slightly sideways with this. Which folds the tab back over and leaves us perfectly back in position. Happy days. So that's the first piece done. Now, with that in place, and I'm sorry to break it to you, but the chimney doesn't actually connect to anything. The chimney is just a decorative piece on the back. The whole burner assembly is contained within this front chamber. These three pieces are all aligned so that this, when you've slid the front in, just slot down and these three locate like this. So I'm going to be very careful here, sliding it in on the near face of the paint, just in case it does chip an edge. I'm going to bring that over and very carefully just bend everything until these three slot into the holes. Now at this point, if necessary, you might need to offer a little bit of a jiggle. This one here isn't going nicely. Again, for goodness sake, at this point be very, very careful to not scratch the paint. It'd be a real shame to go to all this trouble and then fail at this point. So those three are now located. I'm going to check the front, make sure everything is as it should be at the front, and it is. That's lovely. So I can now press those down. Okay, everything is seated. I'm going to put these two over first to pull everything at the back down, rather than putting the back one in and then potentially having it slightly deformed. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over. I'm not going to be resting on the boiler. I'm going to be resting on my hand this time, or rather, more accurately, resting on my lap, because we do need to put quite a bit of force onto this. And you can see the witness marks from where it went before. These are going to bend backwards. So again, just checking, make sure we're still flush, and we are. That one is done. Check, it's all still flush. This side, as you can see, has popped out. So I need to basically push that back down in as I'm attaching the other side. Okay, perfect. Now the last one, again the witness marks, you can see the scrapings. This one's going to pull down, and it's quite a long thin tab, so I'm going to start this one with my finger. Well, I'm not, it's too stiff. I'm going to start this one with the pliers, just so that I've got something to hit, because of course I can't get in much of an angle there. Okay, let's see, there we are, beautiful, very happy with that. Okay, so the next piece is the steam pipe. How to show you this? There is a little notch out of the side of the housing here. I didn't want to put this pipe on first because it could easily have deformed when I was attaching the pins here. But there's a hole here. There's a hole at the top. What we're going to do is feed this bit of the connection down. You can get replacement pipes for these, by the way, and feel around with it until it pops out of that hole. Just going to put my head on the other side. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so once that's through, you're then in position to be able to, again, just bring that over and very gently just finger tight for now, drop that over there. So we also have filler, and we also have the steam valve assembly, pressure relief valve. It's also the whistle, I believe, but the inside of this, as I mentioned before, has two flat sections that hold the bar with the weight on it directly over the pin in the middle of the pressure relief valve, and that's very, very important. So as we put this back on, we need to make sure that everything lines up and we don't over tension it all with that in the wrong place. There are 2 fibre washers to go on this. I'm going to see how they do. I may replace them. Certainly they're easy enough to get hold of. So we'll put these back on, and the arm's going to flip around a bit until we get further down, but then the absolute giveaway of the position it needs to be in when you get to about here is that it has to be over that pin in the middle. And there we are. It is just possible that that second washer was to space it correctly rather than having it round at an angle. Now I am going with the picture on a box, in so much as to say the position of the arm with the weight on it was shown like that on the box of a D12, so I'm going to just run with that. I've gone as original as I possibly can, including, even though it was a monumental pain to do, the red around the outside of the steam assembly. Okay, so everything is nipped up on the steam assembly. There is another pipe that we need to consider for this one, and this one is easier to put on in advance of reconnecting anything. So I am going to refit this through this little hole here before I put it down through into the base there, and this is going to be a little bit fiddly, so bear with me. This is not as long a piece of thread as it would have been nice to have, but we'll get there in the end, I'm sure. I'm just going to very gently turn this. My fingers are too clumsy with that spring piece in. Maybe I should have put that in afterwards. In fact, I might take that back off. Yeah, let's take that off. That'll make life easier. Just got to make sure I don't fire the spring across the room right before I do anything else. I'll move this all safely out of the way. Before I scratch anything, I'm going to retrace all of my steps. Before I lose this spring, I'm going to get ready to catch it. All lessons learned the hard way, but really important to make your life as easy as possible, so that you don't have to take shortcuts or scratch anything. Now one thing to watch out for with these, and this is the other tool I didn't mention, you may notice the inside of these pipes can be pretty caked up with limescale, so I'm just going to prise these out of here a little bit, just out of the union connector there. I have already treated these with the same stuff that descaled the boiler, and I would certainly encourage you to do the same. It seems a shame to waste it. Okay, so what we have here is a flared end that forms the seal. We've got a deflector sitting around a little threaded section, and this is exactly the same kind of join that you see on brake lines on a car. Exactly the same kind of thing, just in miniature. In fact, I have a fabrication job coming up. I actually have plans to make a model engine from scratch in the near future, and I shall be using, just to prove that it can be done, I shall be using brake line equipment to build that model. So keep an eye out for that one, if this is your kind of thing. If it's not, well, this is what I do when it's too grim outside to do the day job. Alrighty. So that is everything ready now to be reattached to the base plate. bring it back over. Just to make life easier in a second, I will now reattach the cursed spring. Because otherwise I'll be doing this backhand over the top of the engine, the boiler rather. Okay, there we go. And this, now that everything is nicely lined up, just slides gently through that hole. Don't drop it, it'll scratch the base. I'm just going to pivot everything nicely around there, back in place, and then we have the 4 remaining nuts and bolts, or machine screws and bolts anyway. So I'm going to take my time with these, no need to rush. As before, screw it gently on, just finger tight. At this point I'm not really wanting to turn this upside down, so you'll have to take my word for it here that I am indeed only attaching these finger tight, in this pretty much by touch. It's actually easier to locate them for some reason. Okay, so the last 2, then we can gently rock it over. Put the screwdriver very gingerly in place and just nip these up. Now these ones can be tightened, they can be accessed. Of course the ones on the back of this grey plate can't. Okay, so what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to hold the nut on the back, not with the screwdriver, just with the socket. Screwdriver on the front, and I'm just going to tighten this up finger tight. It really doesn't need to be any more than that. Okay, so that is the reconstruction very nearly finished. One last job to do, and that's to reconnect the steam pipe underneath. Okay, so the last job here is to reattach the steam pipe, and be extremely careful when I do this for several reasons. Not least the fragile state of the paint. When it came off, the silver solder was very happy to part company with itself, so I think if I just heat that back up, those 2 pieces should slide nicely back together. As before, I am going to use a fiberglass mat. This is the sort of thing you use if you're doing plumbing work. Okay, and you can see the spots here actually. There is a video online of Wilesco making these things. Those spots are caused by a little welder that heats everything up nice and tight. I am going to do this using a brazing torch and then just push the ends together. I might need to put another little dab of end feed solder in there. If I do, I do. But this should, I'm hoping, be enough. Okay, let's see what we've got. Heat this really hot and see if I can push the two ends together with a pair of pliers. Yes, you can. Perfect. Okay, so I'll check that in a few minutes, and yeah, it's probably going to need a spot of additional solder in that, so I'm going to prop it onto its end. Not the neatest job I've ever done, but that should hold. Still very, very hot, so just making sure. Making sure there isn't any gaps. Lovely. Job done. Tidy that up in a sec. Okay, that's it done. The chimney just slots onto the crown at the back. Of course, if you've got one of these, you know that already because they come disassembled. Might need to repair that. In this case, I got lucky, didn't need to. And that is us. Pretty much ready to steam test. Of course, one more job I do have to do is just tightening up the various different fittings, which I shall do in a second. Just go around and check everything, and then I'll put some water in, and we'll give her a steam test. So there we go, guys. The finished product, nice and shiny. Lovely new paint, no dinks or donks, no scratches. I'm sure there will be before too much longer, but right now relatively box fresh and a faithful restoration to the original with all original parts, including, even though it's new old stock, that little spring just in there. So I'm going to do one more video with this one, and that is a full steam up and run through. The boiler is not leaking, so I can confirm with the basic test that I've just done that solder joint underneath is intact. Not the prettiest job in the world, but certainly very functional. So we'll be oiling it up using the appropriate procedures. Not so easy to find instructions on how to do that kind of thing these days, I guess. They are still made, these models. Wilesco still operates, still the biggest factory in the world, I believe, producing steam models. But the operating procedures pretty straightforward. Just a spot of oil in a number of places, number of oiling points on this model. Take the actual piston out, oil the piston, and we'll go from there. But yeah, very happy with that. I think that's a splendid birthday present in anyone's books. I hope he likes it. And yeah, next video you see will be this thing in action. So thank you very much for joining me on this little journey, and I will see you next time. Take it easy, guys.